All right, we are back. Practice number, what was this, five today, Adam?
Yep.
Practice number five, first day in full pads for the Buffs, and Adam, Coach Carl Durrell talked about, guys got after it. I mean, we hear this every year, right? That first day in pads, guys get really excited about it and kind of get after it. Sounds like this was no different.
Yeah, they only had one live period, which means you tackle to the ground, but they did a lot of individual one-on-one work. And Carl Durrell mentioned that one group he's really challenged from a physicality standpoint is the cornerbacks. Watching the film of this team last year, he felt like that was one area they really needed to improve on. And those are pretty thin guys, so you're going to have to motivate them to want to get their hands dirty, right? I mean, those guys are probably better in coverage than they're going to be in run support, but that's an emphasis of this staff, and it sounds like there was quite a bit of energy. Looking forward to every day we get some video, some B-roll video from practice, and kind of looking forward to seeing exactly how much energy those guys were showing.
Yeah, you mentioned how skinny those guys are. Makai Blackman is one that ever since he got here, you're like, how is this guy going to play? Um, KJ Trujillo is another one, but those guys on game day, they show up and play pretty well. So yeah, he's getting after it. Carl Durrell also mentioned that, yeah, he gravitates towards those receivers that he has coached for a number of years. And again, like we see every year, right? Mike McIntyre, Mel Tucker, they both gravitated towards DBs. Carl Durrell towards those receivers.
And that's a selling point for Carl Durrell, right? When he's recruiting receivers, is look at my background, look at the guys that I coached in the NFL, and Cheverini has proven to be a good receivers coach, obviously, but he's also now a play caller. And so having some help, I think, at that position when you have somebody that's a coordinator is a benefit. And Carl Durrell doesn't have that intense of a personality to where I think that's going to annoy players. If I know there was times when Dan Hawkins would get too involved with the DBs and they're like, come on, man, get out of here. But I think Carl Durrell, I think they're just going to soak up what he has to give them in terms of knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting, to know what that dynamic is like with he and Chev. Last year with Mel Tucker and Travaris Tillman, it was his first year really on the job, coaching Power Five, and so he kind of welcomed Tucker. I have no idea. I'm just curious, Chev, being an experienced receivers coach, how he takes a new guy coming in because he's kind of run that group by himself for a number of years.
Well, that's also, Brian, a position, though. There's a lot of guys, right?
Yeah.
Especially you look at it, they've got five guys that have returned that have caught passes at CU, and then they've got five freshmen, and you've got walk ons in the mix, too. So that's a lot of people for one coach to be giving individualized feedback to every rep, right? So I don't think in that sense there's too many cooks in the kitchen. That's a position I think you kind of welcome that.
Yeah, it might be a different story if it was like quarterbacks or something like that. But Adam, you asked him about the uniqueness of this year. Not only testing, which is 2 hours every morning, but these guys have to deal with class during camp now. So it's not really like camp, but there's more on their plate in these early days of camp, I guess, so to speak. I mean, it's interesting what they have to deal with right now.
During a normal preseason camp, they usually have about a week of summer school to finish up. And then there's a good at least 2 weeks in there where they have nothing but football. And
Yeah.
so they go through a lot of walkthroughs. We obviously talk about the practices, and that's when our interview availability is. But in a normal preseason, and I'm sure they're still squeezing that in because they have to get some of this in, but almost daily they do walkthroughs in a normal preseason camp. And so it's not just the start of the semester. I mean, there's guys that are getting close to finals and midterms and all that stuff. So there's definitely a lot on the plate. Carl Durrell said they've been doing a good job of handling that, which is impressive. I mean, this is, you talk about that testing window starting at 6 in the morning.
Hmm.
I mean, that is a full day. And so it just shows you how much these guys really want to play football.
Yeah, Tyler Lytle mentioned it the other day that when you're in this mode, by about 9 o'clock, you have no trouble falling asleep at night. So, you can understand that when you see their schedule. One guy, Adam, Carl Durrell has mentioned how pleased he's been with how these guys have handled this whole year. But one guy, Colby Purcell, we talked to today, he mentioned he got things going through Home Depot. Going to get some lumber and some cement and building himself and some pipe and building himself sort of a weight room in his garage back home. And yeah, I always love hearing. That's one thing out of this whole year, Adam. That I've kind of enjoyed hearing some of the stories of how these athletes have stayed in shape during the pandemic.
Yeah, had you told me, okay, guess which player the second he got home when this pandemic hit, went to Home Depot and built his own squat rack and bench press and was doing pull-ups on trees. I think Colby Purcell would have been my prediction, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So, I think if you're a CU fan, you'd have a hard time finding a guy that you'd rather that you want to root for more than him, because he has put everything in there. And he's a big guy, but he's not like the Terrence Lang or Stefan Nembot where he's just a freak. He works really, really hard for it. And so moving back into center, he said it's like riding a bike. He had been still doing, snapping the ball last year as the backup center. And so a pretty natural transition for him. So I'm anxious to see him. This could be one of those years where a guy like Colby Purcell could take a jump up and maybe be an all-conference guy, just because maybe some others weren't working as hard during the shutdown.
Yeah, and not only that, but he's gotten better, right? He's a guy that is more mature now, and he talked about. You also asked him about the gallbladder, and that surgery was almost exactly a year ago. He said October 9th of last year, and that it's been a game changer for him. He used that phrase, and that he's just been great ever since then. So, I feel like he played pretty well at guard last year when he was healthy. I thought he was pretty good at center a couple years ago. I'm interested to see him now for a full season back at center. And Carl Durrell said he's working at guard as well, but I imagine he's going to be at center all year as long as he's healthy.
Yeah, and I think Austin Johnson will probably be his backup. We've heard a lot of good things about his development, and another guy that puts in a lot of work. He's been working at 6'0" strength. Even went down there a couple times when Boulder campus, they weren't allowed to have big groups together. So he's another guy to keep an eye on. But I think Colby Purcell, it's a no-brainer that he's your starting center without question.
Yeah, and one guy he goes up against pretty much every day in practice is Jalen Sami. We were able to talk to him today as well. Another guy that Adam, you fully expect to stay, working on some weights throughout the offseason. He's a big dude, and it sounds like he's off to a good start as well.
Yeah, he's a redshirt sophomore, and Carl Durrell is already, mentioned the fact that he thinks he's going to be an NFL guy down the road. So it was pretty impressive for a guy that gray shirted, then redshirted, had that knee injury, coming out there and playing over 400 snaps, the second most among CU's defensive linemen. And there was a couple years ago when Javier Edwards came in there and he would get pushed down the field sometimes. You didn't really see that happen often with Jalen Sami. I'm sure, because you're not really keen in on that nose tackle every play. I'm sure he made mistakes, obviously, but he was really, really solid given his lack of experience playing at this level, and can't wait to see what he does this year.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly held his ground better than Javier did that first year. I've said this before, but I remember, after that 2018 season, talking to DJ Elliott, and he was raving about Sami, and I said, can he be as good as Javier was in 2018 as a senior? And he said, absolutely. I think he can be, maybe even better than that. And Javier was pretty good in 2018. I thought Sami was a little bit better maybe last year, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does this year. He also mentioned, Adam, that great depth at defensive line, which we've talked about before, but it really sounds like that's showing up in practice, and that he's pleased with seeing so many different guys that can go in there and kind of keep fresh legs up front.
Yeah, we talked about Chris Wilson saying that he wants a really deep rotation. You can't be too deep at that position. There's a lot of positions where they call it a good problem, like Carl Durrell said with the receivers. It's like, but at some point, like you said, they're going to have to narrow it down, because you want guys to get in a rhythm. D-line, though, is one of those, probably the position you're going to rotate more than any other. And so that's where you want to be deep. And it's just crazy. Again, we talked about on our last video how much that's changed in the last year and a half. So, that's going to be interesting to see exactly how deep they go. You're probably going 6, 7, ideally. Again, you don't want to go too deep in terms of then guys have trouble getting into a kind of a rhythm out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the starting three we know of, and there's a bunch of those guys that got experience last year. Some young guys. I'm curious to see how deep it goes. I mean, last year I believe Jimmy Brumbaugh talked about going 9, 10 deep. I'm not sure they can actually do that. They never did last year, but I'm not sure if they can go that deep this year or not. We'll see. But they've certainly built up some talent there, so it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, I always love when you get a new coach in and they have these different terms for things. And Carl Durrell when they're in shells, when they have helmets and shoulder pads, but not pads on their lower body. He called them being in light bulbs. I kind of like that.
Yeah, he explained it because the light bulb is bigger at the top, and that's what it looks
Yeah.
like when you're just in shoulder pads. But yeah, I've never heard
I
that
think I'm going
before
to
either.
use that now.
I kind of like it. So yeah, it is interesting hearing those new terms, and you certainly see a sort of a pep in Darrell's step as their five practices in. I mean, we saw him today was the first time we've talked to him since after that first one. I think he was a little bit in business mode, and the Zoom was not working that well that day. You can see some frustration. It seemed like today he was in that. Okay, I'm in a rhythm now. We're 5 days in.
Yeah, and shout out to CU Sports Information staff because, yeah, they had that one hiccup. Just the internet wasn't working that well the first day, but it's really gone off without a hitch. Obviously, keep saying it. Would rather be there in person, but it's coming along pretty well.
Yeah, well, Adam, I think that'll do it for us today. No media availability, no practice tomorrow. So we'll be back, I guess, on Thursday to do this. Is that right?
Sounds good.